everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of Saevus Corax Deals with the Dead by KJ Parker. It's been a while since I've done a KJ Parker review. It's not that I've stopped reading his books. I've been going through some of his short stories and kind of ticking those off my list, but I haven't filmed reviews on those because I haven't finished the entire anthology just yet. But I love KJ Parker, as you all know. He is one of my favourite authors of all time. And I was given a copy of this book a few months back, but essentially after I interviewed him at the start of this year, which is still to this day one of the best experiences that I've ever had. And he sent me a copy of all three books. I thought I'd finally sit down and actually film my review of the books now that the book is actually coming out in October. So it's not that far away. Without further ado, let's jump into a quick summary of what this book is about. So we are following the main character of Saevus Corax, who is a battlefield salvager, and he salvages things like weapons, armor, basically whatever is useful. He also salvages bodies because why not? And he then goes on to sell those things for money or for, other objects or whatever that he might need. His past basically comes to bite him, and what ensues is a really fun time. Essentially, I'm not going to give anything away on the plot because again I don't want to spoil it, but I think once this book comes out later on this year I will do a spoiler-filled review of the entire trilogy. The point of this review is to convince you to go pick it up because it's amazing. It's going to give you an indication of how this review is going to go. What did I like? One noticeable difference about this book is the fact that this is a first-person narrative. Almost all of Parker's books are third-person narrative, apart from some of his short stories are first-person. I think you're either going to really like that or you might find it slightly jarring. I loved being in Saevus's head. I just think it was an absolute delight. I just loved how he thinks, and his incredible wittiness is just something that gave me life. It feels like we are going on this adventure with Saevus, whereas I think with a lot of his other books, you'd feel like that layer of distance, which I think works for those stories. And I think for this one, having it in first person narrative also really, really works. In terms of the writing is excellent. And interestingly enough, I felt like this one was a lot sharper than his other books. Not to say that he needed to be sharper, because I don't think Parker is one of those authors that wastes words. But for some reason, it really did feel like the narrative was a lot tighter. I felt like the pacing was really spot on. And no page, sentence, or word was wasted, in my opinion. We pretty much get straight into the smoking gun of what kind of kicks off the whole story. It's so fun. It's cynical, cutting, but also funny. And few authors get this balance right, and Parker is one of those very, very few authors who gets that right. The only other author that comes to mind that does that well is Abercrombie. And I can't really think of anybody else who does that as well as those two. And I think Parker does it slightly better, in my opinion. As an extension of that, one other thing on the writing side was the dialogue. The dialogue was perfect. I've talked about Parker's dialogue before in the past. He writes really witty and quick-paced dialogue between the characters. He never misses a beat in this regard. I think his dialogue is some of the best dialogue out there, especially because his characters sound like dry, sarcastic British people, which is what I am. I am a dry, sarcastic British person. So I can heavily relate to a lot of the stuff that he says. Parker is, again, one of the few authors when I'm reading his books, I will laugh out loud. Very, very few authors have been able to make me laugh out loud, but Parker is one of those few. And it's because he has that very conversational, whilst also very witty, funny kind of tone underlying a lot of his dialogue, which I love. I'm just here for it. The character work is excellent in this one. I think Saevus is a really compelling character. If you've read Saturninus, you will see some parallels, I think, between the two of them. He definitely reminds me of Saturninus, and like I said before, he has this sharp, cutting wit that is so characteristic of Parker's writing. And I think a lot of that is funneled through Saevus. He's a very lovable character, despite being a very morally grey character. He has many shades of grey, and yet you're rooting for him because he's a bit wacky and he's a bit weird, and we just want him to succeed. And we're kind of here for it. His background is super vague. We don't really know much about him. We do get some allusion to the fact that he has multiple names. So that adds to the kind of mystique of the character, which I really loved. And it's made me more interested to see where his story goes because I want to learn more about where he's come from and who he is. The other thing I will add is that there is a stellar cast of secondary characters. I'm not going to go into each character right now because, like I said, I will do a spoiler-filled one when we get to it. But there is a really excellent secondary cast of characters that really stood out. Every single character feels distinct. Every single character has a place. There is also a really interesting, compelling female character in this book. I've said before, one of my only few criticisms of Parker is the fact that his female characters are almost tertiary characters, but in this one, this character had a very strong place, and I think it really elevated the overall story as a result, because I think her place really made sense, and I loved her interactions with Saevus as well. In terms of the thematic work, as usual, we have a lot of thematic work covered in this book. A lot of it is similar to what we've already seen, but it never feels boring or overdone. So we have really interesting discussions around war, loyalty, religion, friendship, and how the balance of power can shift at any moment. We have all of these things playing out at the same time as well, because Parker is not one of those authors where he'll just kind of focus on one thing at one time. Everything is interwoven together. Everything kind of hits the boiling point at the same time. Chaos ensues, and then our main character is often trying to pick up the pieces and trying to figure out what happens next. And I love that. I think it's very characteristic of Parker's writing. I think if you've liked any of his other books, you will love this book because it's just bang, 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 bang. I have seen some reviews of people saying that it's a bit slow in places. I personally disagree. I think there are some quiet moments in this book, but I think the quiet moments really add to the overall feel of the story and really help with that overall pacing whilst also building the characters up in a way that's super compelling. I gave this book a 5 stars. I loved it. I wouldn't say I rate it as highly as, say, The Folding Knife or The Company, which are still my 2 standout Parker books, but I would say it's maybe on par with The Hammer. I really like the tone of this one. Like, I think this one is quite fun and very witty. A lot of his other books, like The Hammer, The Company, The Folding Knife as well to some extent, they're very, very dark. And while there are moments of humour, I feel like this one has more moments of humour that counteract some of the more cynical themes in the book. Whereas in his other books, not even the humour can necessarily take you out of that cynicism. So I really appreciate it for that. And I think a lot of people who are new to Parker should start here because of that, because it's a good slow intro, I think, into some of his more broader thematic work. It's also not too focused on any one kind of industry. I've mentioned before that each Parker book will focus on one specific thing, kind of contextually. So The Folding Knife is all about banks, mercantile banks. The Company is all about like how to build a society, basically, how to build like legal structures and things like that. The Hammer is how to build almost legal structures and all of that. And whereas with this one, I think there's a little bit of everything. So it's not too much for a beginner, at least, compared to some of his other books. So if you are a beginner to Parker, definitely would recommend starting here. The other really great thing as well is that the first book is coming out in October. The second book in the trilogy is coming out in November, and the third book in the trilogy is coming out in December. So they are coming out each month, and so you'll be able to get through the trilogy by the end of this year if you so wish to. I love this book. I loved it. It was just so good. It was amazing. And I've said this before, whenever I read a Parker book now, I feel like I'm coming home, I feel like I'm coming to a world that feels really familiar to me. And that's exactly what I felt when I read this book. It's a top-notch, strongly recommend. Go and read it. Go and pre-order it. Just read it. If you have read it, let me know down below. It doesn't come out until October 5th. This review will probably come out on the same day. So if you have read it or you're going to read it, let me know down below and we'll take it there. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe as always. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.